and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, SIF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my producer and co-host Aaron Spears. And Aaron, this is an extra special day for the film festival.
It certainly is, Dee. April 13th, 1977, the very first Cleveland International Film Festival kicked off at the Cedar Lee Theater. Fast forward 4.5 decades, and here we are in the midst of SIF 45 streams.
Yep, and in honor of the festival's birthday, we'll be celebrating all day with giveaways on SIF's social media accounts, thanks to our birthday bash sponsor, Pierre's Ice Cream.
Another thing to celebrate is that April 13th is the midway point in the festival's 2-week run, and we're marking that with a special screening of the centerpiece film titled Summertime.
Yeah, and it's a perfect celebration film full of light and color and beautifully crafted language. And here to talk about it with us is the film's director, Carlos Lopez Estrada, poet Mila Kuda, and poetry coach Marcus James. Thank you all for being with us.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Carlos, I want to start by talking about the open of Summertime. It starts with L.A. Overture, which was written and performed as a voiceover by Mila. And I felt that the visuals you provided were really poetic as well, especially that extended shot that pulls back from the water to the pier and to a shot of the next poet. Was that really all one long shot? And if it was, how long did it take you to get it right?
There's a lot of stories I think that I could tell you around that opening poem. I think the first one, or maybe Mila can tell you about it, is that it was the last poem that we put into the movie. This happened during post-production. We had an entire cut of the film. We screened it for a few people for feedback, and the one of the bigger notes that we got is like, it's because the movie is so unconventional, because the way you incorporate poetry is not something that our ears are used to normally when you go watch a movie. So it would be great if we could have something that sort of like gets our ear ready for it and like brings us into the world and introduces this language. So while we were in post-production, I was just scrambling to find something that could accomplish this. And I reached out to Mila and I was like, hey, can we think of poets who potentially would be able to help us capture this feeling that we're trying to get? And she essentially said, why don't you just read this poem that I wrote while we were workshopping the movie, because she was doing like this commute from her home in the South Bay to Koreatown where we were working. Anyway, she had written this poem and she just had it there hiding, didn't tell anyone. It was perfectly encapsulates the movie and everything in it, and it's like the most beautiful way to open it, and she just would have never told me had I not asked. Anyway, okay, so that happened, and then we pieced the intro together from B-roll that we had. Like this was not a planned intro, so then we had to sort of like sift through all of our documentary footage, and then we came up with what you saw.
That's a great accident.
Yeah. Well, it seemed like exactly the right place and poem to begin with, but with all the collaborators on this film, how did you do it? Like, how did you come up with the structure to create such a even flow and develop your beginning, middle, and end? Was that going into the project or discovered during editing? Or
I'll pass it over to Mila in a second, because she was one of the key components in us being able to accomplish this. She was our poetry supervisor. But really, I think that the real answer is that we were really building on the work that the nonprofit that we partnered with had been developing for years. They call it Get Lit. This is the office that we're in right now. Just serendipitously, we're here today. But I met all the poets here. Marcus was actually hosting this. Were you a host? Presenter?
Yeah, I was hosting this poetry showcase, and basically what ended up happening was the executive director Diane reached out and was like, "Hey, we have these people from Little Ugly specifically Carlos coming in, and they want to help us revamp our Blitz shows, which were just shows that we did at high schools. And so they asked me to host it and just gather as many poets as possible and just essentially do a speed round of just poem after poem after poem. And I think at that day we had like 15 or 16 people show up and just, yeah, one after another deliver funny poems, heartbreaking poems, poems about the city, poems about your parents, like anything and everything under the sun. It was actually probably one of my favorite experiences like ever. It was a lot
Yeah,
of
I
fun.
think
Nice.
that should happen more often. Okay, and anyway, we use like they have a very particular method of sort of like workshopping poems, working with individual poets to sort of like bring out the most clear message that they want to convey. So we sort of like build on top of that, and then Mila, if you want to shed a little light on how
Yeah. So, I mean, Carlos already said it. My role was sort of poetry supervisor of the project, and that just meant that I helped to workshop all of the individual pieces to try and find a sort of harmony amongst every storyline and kind of create a connective tissue that could turn into a larger narrative. And so that just meant most poets already had an idea of what their scene wanted to be. They came either with a poem that they had already written, or they were like, I'm going to write this new poem. And then we just worked on it like every single day of the summer before we started filming to make sure that the stories made sense, that they connected to each other, that they echoed other parts and themes of the larger narrative. And it was a really fun and chaotic process overall. Certainly difficult because we're dealing with like 27 young poets who had also like most like never really acted. So like getting them to respond to emails is like already a difficult enough task, but then having them show up and work so diligently to workshop their pieces, it was really magical and rewarding, but also definitely, as I said, chaotic.
Yeah.
Right.
But you talked about, Mila, the lack of acting experience, but being a veteran slam poetry person yourself and a champion, I wondered if that helped when you were in front of the cameras, or is it a whole different energy and focus when you're doing it to a lens as opposed to an audience?
I definitely think that it is a different experience. And I think it did help, though. I'm not going to lie. I think we all, for the most part, did have performance experience, at least at open mics, at slams. Like we are used to performing on a stage in which you give one really great performance and then you sort of just walk off and sort of simmer in that leftover energy and emotion. But the thing that's really different about filming for a movie is that you are going to be running those poems over and over again to get the right clip. And we're also in the process of making a soundtrack for the movie right now. And earlier this week, I was recording my gay poem for the summertime soundtrack, and I had to say that poem over and over again for like 4 hours while standing up. And like, you start to really hear your own words and your own voice back to you in a way that I don't think you would have otherwise. Because I'm never going to be saying my poem for 4 hours straight unless someone is requesting that I do that. And you really do start to like feel like you are in the world of your poem for a lot longer than you're used to. And what comes with that is a whole layer of discovery and nuance that otherwise I think wouldn't have shown up.
But I will say that in terms of performance experience, like, yes, the poets hadn't acted professionally in front of a camera on a film set before, but the understanding that they have over their voices and their bodies and their words is so much. It's masterful, I think, compared to people who don't have this type of training, because they've spent years trying to be very deliberate about every word they use and why they use it, and performance techniques, anything from like volume to like being able to establish a real connection with an audience. So these are all tools that it's sort of like the foundation to any acting. So the fact that they had years and years and years of this experience made us all believe, and we were right in believing this, that the lack of film experience wouldn't really mean anything. And it was true. Like, sure, they had to learn some technical, they had to do it multiple times. They had to learn what a mark was. They had to learn, how all these things that you get through quickly, and then you get to like the essence of what it means to convey an emotion, and they were masters at that, all of them.
I would definitely agree with that.
Marcus, as a poetry coach, what was your role in the film?
Yeah, so my role was to help out with your emotion, help out with engaging with your audience. A lot of our folks had to transition from engaging with a live audience to like how do you engage with the camera? How do you still show those same facial expressions into a camera? And that was probably my biggest role with a lot of the poets was definitely reminding them like when you're on a stage you're performing for people at the back of the stage, so you're going to be very big, you're going to be very bright, but when you got a camera, like the smallest things are important. You got your facial features, you got all of those things. So that was a big focus on my end. And then I also want to say that like Mila was also a huge part of that as well. Mila was on the sides like, y'all are doing great, but like, what are we doing with our eyes? What are we doing with this? What are we doing here? So that was my role. Yeah.
Nice.
I was curious if a poetry coach has to be someone who is themselves an experienced poet.
That's an excellent question. So on my own personal take, I think it's very helpful. I think of it in the sense of like I would not ask any of the poets that I work with to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And the biggest thing of that being like being vulnerable. When you're asking people to perform in front of people they've never met before, and you're sharing these, like I said earlier, heartbreaking stories or these lovely stories, that's a sense of vulnerability that we're not necessarily taught in our day-to-day lives. So my biggest thing would just be like you definitely should be a poet, or at least understand some aspects of that poetry, but more than anything I think you got to be a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do, just because you're dealing with
Yeah.
people's emotions and you're dealing with people's, heartbreaks and all of these, and you gotta take them seriously more than anything, but you also got to find a way to like nurture it and then help them turn that into art. So
Yeah. And I just want to say Marcus is all of those things. A phenomenal
A good person.
phenomenal educator, a phenomenal person, and a phenomenal poet. So the whole entire package. I feel like Marcus is a really inspiring educator and poet, and person. I know I just said that, but I truly mean it. I feel like
Right.
I'm looking to him for inspiration on how to be a good coach, but also how to just be enthusiastic about the work that you do. Because like he said, it is a vulnerable art form. So I feel like it's easy to let that get the best of you sometimes. And I feel like it's always nice and refreshing the way that Marcus can find so much enthusiasm in the language itself and the craft itself and also in the community that comes with it.
And you know what? I will say, Marcus, and not just because you're here, but I'm thinking back at this first workshop that it was here. I was probably sitting like right in the same chair, and you were all standing over there. And Marcus was essentially like hosting it, introducing all of the poets, and just sort of like running the show. And there was something about the sense of community and the sense of camaraderie of sort of like we're here to lift each other up, and the way that you like introduce everyone, the way that everyone else was sort of like supporting and snapping and vocalizing their like really lifting each other up. I think that was one of the most important aspects of what we were trying to capture with the movie, the sense of community that exists between the poets. And it was, I think it's challenging because we don't have that in the film, right? It's not like you can hear people snapping and or
Right.
vocalizing their reactions to the poetry, but I feel like having people like Mila, people like Hannah, who was our dialogue supervisor, and all of the poets as involved as possible throughout the process, it gave us a bit of that sense of community, and that's really what we were trying to capture. I don't know, I'm obviously biased for all the reasons, but I watched the movie and I do get that feeling that I got when I saw that workshop, and which I think was ultimately the goal, to be able to like capture that incredible thing that we experienced. So I think it's because of all of their involvement.
Well, I was obviously not at that workshop, but I definitely felt that watching the film. So excellent work. Excellent work. I did want to ask, though, kind of tied into that first workshop, I'd read that you're very taken by that and were like, okay, we need to work this into film somehow. I'd read that you got some funding for the project before really being sure what the film was going to be. What was the pitch? What did you communicate to get that enthusiasm to I guess the financial backers?
So essentially, when I pitched it to Diane, who's the director at Get Lit, I said, "Look, I have this idea. I'm not sure exactly how it is or how it could take shape, but I think we can do it for very little money, just like true independent movie. Like maybe we'll get some people to give us like a few $1,000s, and then we'll just do it with our friends." Shooting around LA, like no equipment, no permits, like that's the approach, and everyone was into it. But then I happened to meet this woman. Her name's Elisa Tager. She works at a company called Los Angeles Media Fund, and they finance and produce all kinds of projects. They have a sizable fund, and they call it the Los Angeles Media Fund, and here we were trying to come up with this movie about Los Angeles that needed a fund. So I was like, hey, I don't know if this sounds like interesting at all, but I'm working on this project with this group of poets, and here's the website. Here are like I sent her maybe like 6 or 7 poems that I loved. I said it all takes place in LA, super low budget. We need to shoot it this summer because all the poets, or a lot of the poets, are going to be leaving at the end of the summer, to continue their lives elsewhere. And she just had a reaction that is very similar to the one that like I feel everyone who was doing the project was, is like she just lit up and was like, that sounds incredible. She responded to the poems immediately, and she brought it up to the people that she was working with, and I think it was just unanimous. And maybe like a month later, they gave us a big check to make the movie. And
That's a movie right there.
yeah, I know. It was still, it's a lot of money, but it like for in the movie world,
Right.
it was still like the
I get it.
lowest of lows.
Right.
Like we barely were able to sort of like put our team together. Still had to ask for so many favors, and like it's an independent movie in all of its glory, like as independent as a movie gets. But we were able to like get cameras, and we were able to like pay the poets. I can't say that anyone like bought a house from it, but
It's still important.
but we were able to pay
yeah.
like a reasonable, like they weren't just donating their time, which was important. And anyway, we were just able to put it together in like a reasonable way, and I will forever be indebted to the Los Angeles Media Fund people, because I cannot believe that they agreed to do this
Wow.
under those circumstances. Yeah.
Well, I think it gives the film it's some energy too. Like if you had a Michael Bay budget shooting this with giant cranes and stuff, like it's not the same. It's not the same movie.
No, totally.
Yeah.
As Mila mentioned earlier, the process from beginning to end, the development, the production, the post production, and even now as we're getting ready to release it to the world, it was chaotic. But there was something. I feel like what the poets do really well. Oh, I'm about to get poetic here. But what the poets do really well is that they find beauty in chaos, right? And they like there's a lot of stuff in like their lives or at home or in their heads that doesn't quite make sense, and it's complicated, and they use that to make something beautiful. And I think that's very much sort of like what we did. We created this environment that was very unexpected. Scary most of these times, and then we just said, look, here we have a lot of people that we believe in, we have a lot of ideas that we want to share. How exactly we'll get there, we'll figure it out, but this is worth our time, and something good is going to come from it. And that was sort of like the philosophy that we operated under.
Something really good did come from. I mean, the film is beautiful on a lot of levels, and I wanted to hear from you, Mila, and then Marcus, what you were thinking and feeling when you saw the finished film. Were parts of it surprising to you?
You answer first.
Okay. So my first time actually seeing the film was not until Sundance, like opening night. And as I mentioned, like I worked so diligently that summer, workshopping all of those scenes individually and like showing up and seeing the writing process behind the scenes, but I hadn't actually seen the vision fully realized until Sundance. And there is something so special about being in a room full of your like best friends and who are all just happen to be amazing talented artists and seeing their stories projected on a big screen. It's such an iconic event. Like it truly felt so deeply magical and like unlike anything I had ever anticipated or expected. And so it was just wild. Like I can't really explain the out of body experience that was, but I can also say that having all the poets in the room there really made a difference because it did create that environment that was just so full of energy and so alive with like support and sound and volume. We are enthusiastic people, and so it was unlike anything that I had ever anticipated.
I will just say, because Mila keeps saying this, and I want to make sure that I add some context. She didn't see the movie until Sundance because she was living in New York at the time.
Boston.
Boston, sorry. She was
Oh.
sorry. Not because we didn't invite her to see it, because we had a few screenings. I just don't want people to listen to this and be like, well, that's shitty that,
Right.
never got a chance to see it.
That's how rumors get started, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have traded it for the world, though.
Yeah. And then I know Marcus is going to share his story, but I will just preface his story by saying that Marcus was incredibly gracious in a number of ways, but you were.
Nice.
But one of the things that I think was most impressive and that I was really moved by is that he performed this beautiful poem. We had a scene. He plays a Lyft driver, and we had a scene where he performed a poem that's deeply personal to him in the Lyft, sorry. And when we were putting the movie together, things had to get cut, and it was not just his scene, but there was probably like 4 or 5 big scenes, like entire days of production.
Wow.
That just ended up not making it, whether it was like pacing reasons or whether it was just like context, like one seeing it in context, like flow. Anyway, Marcus's poem ended up not making it onto the final film, and I had a conversation with him. I told him he was so incredibly gracious, and then just seeing how he didn't lose like any excitement, or he like what came to Sundance was cheering for everyone in the film and was like just so a part of it. It to me it was very moving. So anyway, thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Oh my God, it's a Marcus show today. Everybody has such nice things. We got to be on podcast more, y'all. No, so I am definitely I'm team clap for everybody. Like that's just how you got to be. And so the first time that we saw the screening, I saw it at, it was like a coffee shop-esque type thing. Do you remember? I cried. Like, I'm going to be honest, I cried because it's exactly what Mila said. All of my friends were there to see them on the screen. Like, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And really, the biggest difference for me is that all of those folks who were on the screen, I had seen them perform at slams. I had seen them perform at like different shows. I've seen them perform live. And so, one, to see their art be taken seriously, that was amazing to me. Like, that's everyone's goal at the end of the day, at least.
Yeah.
You want your art to be taken seriously. And so for that to happen, like I was misty-eyed. And then by the end of the movie, to like see everybody so excited and see everybody like hugging and laughing and being like, oh my God, I can't believe we saw each other on screen, or like, you look so good on screen. All of those little tidbits, once we left, I got in my car and I was just crying. I was like, this is a fantastic moment. And then we went to Sundance, and then even more folks were there. And I think my favorite part about it was that we had to have been the loudest. Like, we had to have been the loudest because anytime anyone came up on screen, everyone started screaming. Everyone was screaming. Everyone was snapping. It was just so alive. And even though it was a movie, it felt like I was at a slam. Like,
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So that was my experience.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Carlos, I need to go film geek here for just a second. I wanted to ask you about some of it's such a unique structure to this film and some of the the filmmaking influences that came to mind watching it, there's like the Richard Linklater, Waking Life, Slacker kind of vibes,
Yeah,
a little bit of maybe like Robert Altman, Nashville.
yeah.
But the more I've been thinking about it, there's slightly like a Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee vibe here as well. I was wondering if you had specific filmmakers or films you're looking to for inspiration on this one.
I mean, I love Do the Right Thing. It's one of my favorite movies. I probably saw that movie like every night while we were doing Blind Spotting. Uh, I I I think I know that movie like every line and every shot, and I one day I'll talk more about it. So I 100% think that Spike Lee's work, but particularly that movie, really influenced just the way I think visually about stories, and not just visually, just the depth that he's able to tap into. So that definitely one, and I think that the guiding principle, and also just the challenge in putting this movie together, is that really wanted to, yes, it had to be like cohesive to some extent, like not, I can't say that it's entirely cohesive, like enough so that you can follow the journey and not get lost or taken out of it, but also that part of its DNA was that it was going to reinvent itself every time a poet showed up on screen. So, depending on the tone of the poem, depending on the personality of the performer, depending on sort of like their ideas of what they wanted their collaboration to be, we could have a musical number in the middle of the movie. We can go into subtitle land and listen to another language. We can like go from a very grounded moment into like a very heightened, like silly comedic beat. So I think that more than anything, it was reminding myself and the people that we were working with that it was okay for it to be messy in that sense, and that we were going to pull from all of the places that we consider inspiring. So yes, I think all of the above, like every movie that you mentioned, definitely has like a strong influence in how this came together.
I have a couple of other things I want to ask Marcus and Mila, but I wanted to jump off there, Carlos, for a second and talk about some of the building blocks that I saw in the movie. I was looking at your background, and it caught my eye that you had been a theater director, and I thought about that because I saw a theatricality in the film that made me wonder if that experience informed your film work.
I mean, I definitely think that it has. How exactly, I'm not sure, or I don't know. Maybe I have some ideas. There's something so, and I think it's the reason why I ended up working on Blind Spotting with David and Rafa, is because we had done a few of these verse projects that sort of like were a hybrid between film and theater, and incorporated spoken word and music. It sounds easier said than done, but it's complicated to try to put all of those mediums together. They're very different practices. So and I think that for whatever reason, and I don't know really what to credit, but I was able to work with them in a way that felt effortless, and that it felt like it was sort of like intrinsic to the projects that we were doing, never like an extraneous thing. And I think a lot of it comes from like my background in music, the fact that I have a love and appreciation for the theater, and also just something about the way that poets, and particularly spoken word poets, relate to their art and the things that they create, just on such a deeply personal and like deeply open way. And I don't know, I guess my personality gravitates towards that. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
really know why, but for some reason I found myself like surrounded by poets, and like I never would have imagined that this is where my life would have taken me, but now I'm like I'm deep in it,
And it's
and
not a
yeah,
bad
no,
thing.
and I love it. But yeah, I think some of it is by choice, some of it was by chance, and I'm just glad to be here with these people.
Yeah, we're glad
Yeah.
to. And I wanted to circle back to Mila and ask you. We talked with Carlos about film influences. I was curious about your influences. Are there poets, teachers, or other art forms that have helped you hone your writing skills?
That is such an interesting question, and also a question I don't think I've been asked to think about before. I think that growing up in like the spoken word scene in Los Angeles, I definitely have mentors who I feel really paved the way for me and my art and like my passion. And the people that come to mind are Alicia Wise, Matthew Cuban Hernandez, Kelly Grace Thomas Vojdani. Like there are a lot of poets from Los Angeles who were the first people to ever sign my name on an open mic list, or the first people to say that my story was worth sharing and helped me hone my craft. And so those are like the people that I want to thank and that I look to for inspiration, because they're the reason that I'm here and able to do these things. And then as far as like an art standpoint, oh my gosh, I love reading poetry. So that is like I could name about 20,000 poets, and I don't think it would be enough. But I don't know. I really truly cannot even begin. Y'all can follow my Instagram. I post a different poem every single Sunday. That's like a poem that I'm meditating with that week, because I really just do love to read, and I feel like so much of like honing your craft has to be admiring the work that comes before you. But I'm just going to name like 5 people. Okay. Okay, let me see if I can do this. I love, obviously there's Mary Oliver. I love, oh my God, this is so much harder than I thought. I love Ross Gay. I love C.A. Conrad. I love, oh my gosh, Marcus, I want you to throw in some names.
For you or for
you?
Oh.
We have similar tastes.
My person that I go to every single time, my favorite poem of all time is Natalie Diaz.
Oh, yes.
If you ever have a moment to read anything by Natalie Diaz, even if it's just an interview, like she is so poetic in a way. I don't even have words. I mean, yeah, I wish I did
To
have
talk
words.
about her words.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, Natalie Diaz is a big one. Right now, we were literally just talking about what we were reading, which is really funny. Sonia Renee Taylor recently has been on for me. She has a book, The Body Is Not an Apology, which is a fantastic book. I'm trying to think who else.
I love Franny Choi. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Ocean Vuong. There are so many writers who Dinez Smith. Like
Dinez Smith.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'll rate it in now. That is a very fun question to be asked, because I constantly am trying to get people excited about poetry. Because I think people can think of it as such like a dry or dead art form, even though we are in one of the most enriching renaissances, I think, of like literature ever. People are so passionate about poetry at this point in time that I feel like if people say that they don't like poetry, I genuinely do believe they haven't found the right poem yet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to think. Shira Ehrlichman.
Cool.
That's another one. we could keep going. Like
I'll say this is gonna be like 2 hours long now. Just a great long list.
Before we get off that, though, I was curious. The poets that you named are all contemporary figures. Yeah. So you're not drawn to older verse, Shakespeare, or even Amiri Baraka, or see, these are contemporaries for me, and it's like ancient history for you.
I just had to take a Shakespeare class for my English degree. Like literally I just like finished that class last week. So I can tell you that I've read Shakespeare in depth. But that doesn't mean that I feel drawn to do that again. And I feel like there are certain old poets who I do look for. It's like my favorite poem of all time might actually be a William Carlos Williams poem. And he's still from the 1900s, like I want to say like 50, 40 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like older, but there's not much before that I'm drawn to, just because I feel like a lot of the work that I like is deeply queer, for one thing. And a lot of the voices that are represented from like hundreds of years ago, they just don't do it for me. Their subject matters don't interest me. I'm not passionate to hear about what they have to say for the most part.
Yeah, as far as older poets go, E.E. Cummings is one who does it for me. I think E.E. Cummings is someone who's like, I think they're exciting. I think they were doing new things.
I have E.E. Cummings on vinyl. I'm not kidding.
Nice.
Why have you not listened?
But I will say that I think part of what drew me and part of why spoken word poetry is going through a really important phase, I think, right now is because it really reflects the culture that we're living in a way that, it's really hard to say that Mr. William Shakespeare, does. And it puts words and emotions and ideas that are just very timely and very important and very true to the people today. And I think just like by definition, like part of the fabric of these spoken word communities is like they're very inclusive, they're very diverse, and they really like look to celebrate and sort of like lift up like differences that exist between people as opposed to the opposite. And I feel like that is just, I could not think of like any other art form that can provide such like tangible, important messaging. So I think that's for me why I sat through this workshop, and I was just like, I've never seen anything like this. I've never felt anything like this. Like anything I can do to support what these people are doing, I think could be important.
Well, as we wrap up here, I know you guys have things to get back to. I wanted to ask, because I know you're kind of virtually touring film festivals. We're just doing some stuff with Seattle the other day. I'm curious if you could speak to what I experienced as sort of an unintended consequence of this film, of the art you guys created together. Having been in quarantine, I just went through a Cleveland winter, trying to keep everybody in my extended family and friends safe. This film, to me, went from being kind of a cinema verite bit of poetry in motion cinema to almost fantasy for me, because I can't just bump into my friends on the street. I can't just hang out or meet someone at the bus stop or strike up a conversation. So I was wondering, have you gotten that reaction from audiences from other festivals?
I will say that I agree with that feeling and that sentiment. Watching it now after having been in isolation for so long, I do feel like there is a degree of that is like fantastical and nostalgic when watching it. But I hadn't
Right.
actually thought about that until, as you mentioned, we were just doing something for the Seattle Film Festival, and that question was also brought up about like what it's like now. And I hadn't so much thought of it as fantasy until you really said that, because it does feel like a certain glimpse in time that is like so distant from what we are now living in. And I mean, also
Mm-hmm.
mentioned today that we're at the Get Lit office today, and I haven't been in this office since like 2019. Like
Yeah.
it's been years. And it's weird to think about how time travels, and weird also because summertime is about a day, a singular day in the summer of 2019, which is just so far removed from our reality. Like I was on the bus every day. I was seeing the cityscape of Los Angeles. Like I was exploring my city in a way that I had never done before. And now it just seems like that won't be happening to the same degree for a long time still to come. So it's definitely interesting. And I'm curious if anybody else has thoughts on that fantastical quality.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I think something that is like really magical to me is that we're going to be opening in theaters in July, and thanks to all the wonderful work that the very smart people have been doing, like there's vaccines now, and people will be, it's I can't say it's going to be back to normal, but it's going to like we're going to allow for people to get together and experience this in like somewhat of a sense of a community, and people are going to be able to get together in theaters and experience this. And it's just the way that summertime has framed my quarantine experience has been really strange and also beautiful and just really meaningful, that as things start to open up, we are going to be able to share our movie in the way that we were hoping it would be shared.
I've got to say, I love this film for the language. It's so intricate and beautifully delivered, for the community that it creates, and just for the joy in the entire film. Thank you all for sharing it with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Yeah.
This is so kind. Thank you.
We've been talking with director Carlos Lopez Estrada, poet Mila Kuda, and poetry coach Marcus James about the film Summertime, which is the centerpiece film for SIF 45 streams. You can get more details about that film when you log on to the SIF website, clevelandfilm.org. You can also help celebrate the film festival's 45th birthday by checking out the giveaways from our birthday bash sponsor, Pierre's Ice Cream, on SIF's social media accounts. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
And we also want to thank our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. Plus, we invite you to support your local film festival. Please consider a donation to the SIF Challenge Match presented by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Our goal? To reach $145,000 this year to support the future of our festival. And we're so grateful for any amount you're able to contribute. To donate, please visit clevelandfilm.org. And thank you for listening to SIF Speaks.